All right. So today we will be talking about community innovation and scaling in systems change. There we go. So first we want to acknowledge that we occupy the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, particularly the Tulalip, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Soxhawtl tribes, who belong to this land and who have stewarded it since time immemorial. We pay respect to the elders, past and present, and to these tribes' right to sovereignty and self-determination. So our agenda for today, very similar to last time. We'll be doing a pre-poll, and then we will quickly run through some content for about 20-ish minutes to help kind of set the context for everybody. We'll then do a discussion activity in both small groups and a big group kind of setting. We'll do a post-poll, and then by popular demand, there is additional time at the end for more discussion, and that's optional, but it runs from 11 to 11:30, and it's the same Zoom link, even though it's a separate invite. So you can just stay on this call if you're planning to stay until 11:30. Can you all see my screen? Can you let me know?
Hey, Janae, can you invite Kamal, Arena, and Mohammed?
Okay. Let me know if there's any issues with hearing me or seeing my screen. So, all right. And if y'all can remember to just mute yourselves when you're not talking, that would be great. So let's go ahead and launch this pre-session poll. If you're new, we figured out last time that in order to get through all the questions, you need to scroll down on your own computer, and then you'll see a submit button, and we can get that going, and then I'll publish results so that we can kind of see where everyone is at. Molly, would you like to go ahead and start that poll? It's saying that my polling is inactive. I don't know if Molly can hear me. Okay, hang on one second. Technical difficulties. Oops. Okay, well, why don't we just, oops. Ugh, sorry, everybody. Here we go. In lieu of doing the poll, while we figure that out, why don't you just think through these questions, take a minute or two, think for yourself where you kind of land with these, and then we'll do the post-session poll where you can respond. So just take a minute, look through these, either write down where you're at, think through it, and then we'll move into what's next. All right. So into the content for today, I'll run through this pretty quickly, but please feel free to ask questions as we go, and we'll also obviously have time for questions and discussions in just a bit. So quick recap on June's professional development session, which was all about balancing the role of programs within systems change. At the top here is a quote that we have found really helpful from Karen Pittman. And it says, program intervention helps people beat the odds. Systems intervention changes the odds. So this is the difference between giving someone a leg up and over a barrier, but leaving the barrier in place, versus removing the barrier altogether so that all people who might have run into it are able to walk right through. Programs address the present need. Systems change gets to the root cause to impact the future. We're really trying to, with systems change, we're really trying to stop the flow of people into that place where they need to access programming. I was actually thinking about this week. Some of you may have had a similar experience, but I was thinking about this as I filled out my ballot. I live down in King County, and everyone running for mayor had homelessness on their list of issues, right? Which is an obvious and really immense issue in Seattle. And as I was reading through the voter guidebook and candidates' websites, I saw many of them talking about how to build enough housing units to meet the current demand, the need for getting people housed, which is a good thing. And some of those ideas were really innovative and looked super promising. But only a few of the candidates also talked about additionally creating systems change. So looking further upstream to address the root causes of homelessness in order to stop the need from occurring in the future. Right? Which, granted, that doesn't sound like super catchy or immediate, but it is where long-term sustainable solutions will come from. So maybe some of you noticed similar things as well. So on to the first bullet point on this slide. Program intervention and systems change are different, but they are not mutually exclusive. Programs can be valuable tools for learning how to best shift the system and for stopping up gaps. They're like bandages for a wound. And a collaborative may develop or bring a program into a system in order to fill a gap. But instead of becoming that program, the collaborative should instead prove out the efficacy of a pilot model of a program. And then after proving how helpful and necessary it is, then you can embed it within the system in a partner or entity that can sustainably house it, right? Hand it off to someone who will hold onto it and make sure that it stays, in this gap where it's really needed. Otherwise, the collaborative risks becoming program focused and really loses the dynamic adaptivity that we talked about last session that really makes collaborative systems change powerful. So the collaborative is a container for change. Instead of seeing the collaborative as a program, we see our collaborative as containers for change. We're building movements, and these movements are local to our neighborhoods and to our communities. And the movements are here to make change in the long term. So a lot of our work in the first few years focused on breaking down silos, which is a good thing. We've been improving coordination, communication, and new partnerships between service providers. And that's a great start, but it is a start. It's important to remember that. Program alignment will only ever lead to incremental change, and we need a bigger shift in the status quo. And that's why building programs is not our end goal. So the question is, what comes after program alignment now that we all have a grounding in systems change? We know that programs can be helpful, and some of the collaboratives have developed and piloted programs, others in the process of doing that. And other collaboratives are defining broader system changes to work on. So how do we approach all of this in a holistic way, weaving together what we've done and where we go next, as well as how to envision ourselves and our collaboratives in the long term? All right, enter community innovation. Um, we have a quote here from Sylvia Chu, who led our Systems Change Learning series last fall. It says, coordinating existing programs and services is different from producing novel solutions. A coordinator is a different kind of human resource from an innovator. Instead of aligning diverse organizational or community interests, the innovator realigns systems and user interests. So coordination, again, while important as a starting point, is not the new that is necessary to create systems change. Creating something new is fundamentally different than coordinating what already exists. We're not just organizing and connecting the old, we're shifting systems to create space for us to deconstruct what is unhelpful, develop new strategies and plans that are guided by the interests and needs of families with lived experience. So we're trying to realign systems with community interests rather than kind of realigning the pieces within a system, if that makes sense. And so we need to think through how to keep that in mind as we develop programs to fill gaps and strategies and a vision for our collaborative systems change work. So what is community innovation? It is both a journey and a destination. So as a collaborative, we are constantly innovating within the context of the community, and an innovation for and within the community is also the product that we hope to end up with. So the question that at least comes to mind for me as I think through that is, do we think of ourselves as innovators? You know, do you think of yourself as an innovator? Why or why not? Good things to think about. Community innovation has really clear boundaries. It is place-based, excuse me, within a specific geography. I'm going to take a sip of water real quick. Okay. So having these clear boundaries really helps us to concentrate our creativity, strengths, and leveraged power in our local, super familiar context in order to create deep impact. So we are not trying to boil an ocean, which is good news. Boundaries are a good thing, and we need to embrace them. There's a lot of freedom and a lot of power that comes in embracing those boundaries. The beauty of place-based, geographically limited work is that we have a clearly defined community, and the community and the initiatives that we pilot in it are living labs. So these living labs provide a safe space for us to experiment, to create ideas and test how effective they are. They're the spaces where we can try new strategies, approaches, and because, again, the community has a clear boundary, we can measure what is or is not working, and we can learn from it. And so we gather regularly feedback from the community and engage the community in design processes so that everything we create is aligned with community experience and community interest. And community innovation, onto this last bullet point, requires an appreciation of the issue that we are hoping to address and a deep understanding of the unique characteristics of the community. So we're trying to create a solution that fits the community, not the other way around. And community context is key. Each community has unique strengths, unique assets, and different key leaders and key players. So we want to root innovation in community interest and in community identified needs, because the success of our initiatives, of any programming that we develop, of our ultimate vision as collaboratives, it requires the momentum of support from the community. So we want to choose a cause and innovations and initiatives that the community will take up and be advocates for, so that it's not just a small group of providers really trying to kind of push against the tide, but it's turning the tide, because we have the community that is really excited about the stuff that we're trying to support, because they've informed it and it is truly getting at what they want and what they need. So to the innovation piece, again, just highlighting that we are trying something new, right? Something wholly different than what already exists, or coordinating what already exists. And given that, it's totally new to us. So how do we plan for our collaborative to do community innovation? What does that look like for us practically on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis? In the realm of community innovation, we can and we will, in future professional development sessions, talk about the how and the who of community innovation. But because of where many core collaboratives are at the present moment, with programs that have been developed that are really great, and strategic plans in creation or in review, which means we're asking ourselves, how do we grow? What does it look like for us to develop? We wanted to first, to today, cover the question, what do we do with what we create? How do we envision our collaboratives' growth and development within systems change, community innovation work? So we've talked about when we create something new, prototype, and prove out a model, the goal is to hand it off so that the collaborative doesn't get dragged into becoming a static program, but keeps its kind of dynamic, nimble nature, and stays a container for change. So how do we translate the good work that we've done in developing models and programs into sustainable aspects of the system? And after we do that, what do we move on to next? And how do we plan for that process? Lots of questions, at least as I was thinking about it, popped up. So the Tamarack Institute talks about 3 different types of scaling. And often in our traditional nonprofit context and culture, we feel pressure to grow our programs by serving more people and providing more services. Those are the outputs that look really good to funders, and they often are the basis for funder decisions to invest in one agency over another. So success, for better or worse, is currently most often determined by how much more a program can do or an organization can provide, even while most often the resources that an organization or program receives are not increasing. So we just see things get tighter and tighter and harder to sustain, right? While the bar of more may make sense in the programmatic context, excuse me, of meeting immediate needs, it doesn't always translate to systems change, success, or growth. So how do we create greater impact in our systems? We're probably most familiar with this first type of the three. The first type is scaling, which is scaling out. And scaling out emphasizes replicating successful initiatives in different physical places in the hope that, you know, an initiative or a pilot program or model that we've built can reach more people or more communities. And while this path of scaling is really effective in the short term, the trade-off is that it often fails to address the deeper system conditions holding problems in place. So we end up serving more of the current need, but it can be at the expense of reducing future need. An additional challenge comes into play when we try to expand into a new community, because, as we already talked about, each community presents a different context with different strengths, different assets, and different leaders. So it requires a lot of time and energy to expand into new communities, particularly if you're looking to take the same model and you know, repeat it with fidelity in a new place. So the second type of scaling is scaling up. Scaling up really emphasizes changing the rules, policies, and laws of institutions. So the focus is on changing the rules of the game in order to create an environment that makes the old way of doing things difficult and or makes it easier for new and innovative approaches to thrive. So if there are any Hamilton fans in the room, the goal here is to change the game, raise the stakes. That is scaling up. So scaling deep, the third bullet point here, emphasizes shifting culture. Scaling deep is all about the fact that durable and lasting change is only possible when people's beliefs, their hearts and their minds, those mental models, assumptions, and narratives have been transformed, and their relationships to one another and to an issue are viewed in new ways, right? This is mindset change. And it's the hardest and also the most important as we look at really long-term systems change. So early stage innovation in collaborative systems change work often looks like mapping systems, like creating a systems change triangle, convening diverse partners, prototyping and learning from new approaches, which I think every collaborative would say, you know, yeah, we've done some of those things. In later stages, it is common to leverage connections, influences, alliances to shift mindsets and redirect resources. So scaling out and scaling up are often early stage work, while scaling deep is later stage work. Okay, practices of scaling. So as collaboratives focused on systems change, when we think about scaling, we should always be deliberate about grounding our decisions in systems thinking. So we should continually be clear on the root causes that we are trying to address with each innovation, and to think through what type of scaling for a particular innovation will best lead to dismantling its root causes. So if you've created, an initiative or a program to specifically address, I don't know, an example of a root cause, economic inequality, be thinking about, okay, we want to take this work that we're doing and we want to take it to the next level. So what is going to actually make the biggest change in that root cause of economic inequality, right? If we've identified specific pieces within it. So because it's easy for us to default into traditional mindsets of really quick and broad replication, right? That's scaling out. It's good practice to really explicitly communicate within the collaborative and also outside of the collaborative what type of scaling we are either currently engaged in or that we want to do. So let's regularly talk in our collaborative meetings about how we will scale to create greater impact in systems. And maybe that does mean scaling out, or maybe it means shifting focus to scale up or scale deep. Over the lifetime of a collaborative, we will probably scale in multiple ways, and that is all part of staying nimble and adaptive and responsive to our community context and to the system that is always trying to stay in the equilibrium of the status quo. So Tamarack highlights several strategies for the different types of scaling. So when scaling out, we don't want to double our workload by doubling the size of the population served when a new community is added. Instead, we want to respect unique communities, unique community contexts, strengths, assets. And in order to do that, the best way to scale out is by sharing principles and practices of an innovation with a new community, so that that community is able to take the idea and tweak it to their own local context. And then our work in scaling out can also include supporting folks, the people who are stepping into replicating their own version of the initiative in their own community, support them in sharing and in co-generating knowledge so that we're all learning and growing, right? We can always be looking for those ways to learn from each other. When scaling deep, it's good to lean really hard into learning and reframing, into spreading big cultural ideas. So really those ideas that run counter to the common narrative, through transformative stories, especially. Some of you have probably talked about or listened to TED Talks or read books about how, one of the best way to combat biases is by looking at examples that directly contradict those biases. So how can we as collaboratives help in that process as we're trying to shift mindsets? And in scaling deep, it's also a good practice to establish communities of practice. So really supporting, more partners and groups into translating, new beliefs into really practical work. So for example, as United Way of Snohomish County, we're trying to generate a community of practice here around systems change with all of you lovely practitioners. So With all scaling, with any type of scaling that we choose, it is always good practice to analyze root causes, and that is ongoing, to build networks and partnerships, to seek new resources, and to commit to regular evaluation and learning. So clearly identifying pathways for growth and what type of scaling will best lead to the change that your collaborative is trying to achieve provides an extremely valuable roadmap. And we have some discussion questions next to help us reflect about this idea of scaling and what it means for our collaboratives. But before we get to that, are there any questions? We covered a lot. So we'll expand while it's here. It's okay if there are not any questions. All right. So I am going to move us into breakout rooms. And these are the questions that we will talk through in the small groups. So breakout rooms will be bi-collaborative. And these are the two questions. I'll go ahead and put them in the chat so that everyone can have them as reference. So let's take about 5 to 10 minutes to talk about this and the idea of scaling within your collaborative groups, and then we'll come back to the big group to share out. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording for the time being.